I'm joined today by a very special guest. His name is Sean Coyle, and if that name is not familiar to you now, it will be shortly. I've known Sean quite a number of years. He's been in the Sandler Network quite a while, but his life changed recently when he took over the Peak Performance franchise in Pittsburgh. So now he's responsible for everything in the business. That said, Sean is somebody who, there's not a single person in the Sandler Network does not look up to Sean. He is a former David H. Sandler Award winner. And if you were to ask anybody in the Sandler Network what Sean is known for most, they would say he's a prospecting beast. That said, what worked yesterday won't necessarily work today or tomorrow. So in this webinar, I'd like to explore with Sean what he's learned from his years of prospecting, what's working for him now, and what he sees changing in the world of sales as we go forward. Sean, you're very welcome to the webinar.
Paul, thanks for having me. Just excited to be your guest, and I've always enjoyed our interactions with each other, and I've learned so much from you and so many others from our Sandler Network just around the world. And what a great community of collaborators and learners. And you know, when I got into this business 19 years ago, I had survived earlier sales careers in college and high school and grade school by being what I would simply call a benign plagiarist. And so that benign plagiarism has benefited me well being part of this network and learning from so many great people. So thanks for having me this morning.
I'm curious, Sean, we cannot ignore the current context, which most people will be watching this webinar in terms of a pandemic that is affecting most businesses, some for the better, most for the worst, in terms of how that may have changed prospecting. And I'm wondering what you're noticing these days, what's changed for you?
Yeah, I think it's a handful of things. So I think, you know, as I've kind of looked at what we had to do, there were certainly some pivots in our conversations. And so, you know, I think what we just went through over the last few months was certainly unexpected. It was no friend to any of us, and certainly nothing that we would ever want to see happen again or wish upon anybody. But I think in terms of having really good conversations, I think it's given us an opportunity perhaps that's never existed in the history of sales to really have good, meaningful, in-depth conversations with people and really talk about just everything. And so I think it's just been great to sort of take a step back, be genuinely curious in your conversations, have a sincere intent in what you're trying to accomplish, and really look to trigger, you know, a good, meaningful next step that triggers your sales process. And I think we've just had a great opportunity to have really vulnerable conversations with people. And I think that's always maybe been there, but we've never really recognized it. Maybe we were never comfortable enough getting to that place. And I think now more than ever, we're all getting to that place. We're opening up, we're being vulnerable.
Sounds to me from what you're saying that your conversations are more laid back, more relaxed, and paradoxically, you're actually getting to go deeper with prospects in terms of that connection. Would that be fair?
I think that's right on. And it's interesting. We've probably always had that chance. And maybe in a small way, we were given the gift of kind of cracking our brains open and letting some of those monkeys get away that, you know, just talk to us all the time. I mean, we've got those negative belief systems, and I think with everything going on around us, the worst thing in the world is not picking up the phone and having a prospecting conversation. And I really, truly believe our prospects want to have these conversations. They may not always want to engage with what we are all selling, right? Doesn't matter what we're selling. But I think they wanted to have those conversations. They want to continue to have those conversations because, you know, although the movement of social distancing, you know, sort of grabbed us, I never wanted to participate in social distancing. I wanted to participate in physical distancing, but I don't think we should be socially distant, and we should be responsible to just reach out and talk to people because people want to talk to others.
And that sounds like a bit of a paradox to me. What you're saying is that by slowing down, we're actually getting to speed things up a little bit.
Yep. No, I think so for sure.
Yeah. What I'm also interested in is that I know that you have made tens of thousands of cold calls over the past few years. And that's not an exaggeration. I've seen you. You talk about slowing things down and having a more meaningful conversation, a more relaxed conversation, less pressure. How is that possible on a cold call? Like, because I can understand it where you've got a relationship with somebody and you can, sit back, ask a few questions, share experiences, but a cold call is different. So I'm just curious to know that how do you transition? How do you get to that stage where you're having those conversations you're now talking about?
Yeah, well, I think it starts in our own brains. And so, I think it's what's the intent we're going into that conversation with? And I think over the years where I've shifted and where I've been able to take some pressure off myself and others is to say, I'm here to extract some information, perhaps extend some information, and sort of manage the ebb and flow of that dialogue. And at Sandler, we've always talked, focus on the process, not the outcome. And so if the process is about asking good questions, understanding where somebody is versus where they might want to be, and we're genuine in that approach, I think we're fine. But I think we have to kind of look at the world that we prospect into. It's like being on a scavenger hunt. If you've ever been on a scavenger hunt, somebody says, go to this place to find this object. If you can't find it, you can't find it. And it's really no one's fault. If my wife says, you got to go to the store and you got to pick up a can of black beans. And if I can't find those black beans, and if I ask somebody in the store to tell me where those be, and they're not there, well, it's not really the store's fault. It's not my fault. It's not my wife's fault. It's not the beans' fault. It's just a reality of what it is. And so I think it is, these last 4 or 5 years, but certainly now more than ever, it's really been about kind of viewing that world like this giant gumball machine, right? Where we've got all these different colored gumballs. And, I've always wanted and loved the green gumballs, but they're not all green gumballs in there. So I can't expect every time I turn that knob to have a green gumball come out. Sometimes I'm going to get an orange one. And, that's okay. I can hand it to my little brother. And then sometimes I'm going to get a blue one. And that's okay. I can throw that one in the garbage. But I know that I'm going to get some green gumballs because, gosh darn it, they're in there. And I can see all the green gumballs, but I can see the orange ones and I can see the blue ones. And so probability tells me that there's going to be some combination of green ones and blue ones and orange ones coming out every time I turn the knob. And to me, that mindset has really taken the pressure off the conversation on that cold call, where, I think in times past, we put a lot of pressure and, I just spent all this time getting past gatekeepers and, navigating automated phone trees and, they came to the phone. Now what do I do? And I think it's just going in and saying, I want to have a conversation with you. And if you're willing to have the conversation, that's great. If it ends up resulting in we want to invest additional time with each other down the road, that's also great. But if it ends up that we don't want to invest additional time with each other, we're fine, because I just have to turn that knob another time to see if that next one's going to be a green gumball.
What I'm hearing, Sean, is attitude. That's the mindset that you bring to those interactions, is that there's something in here, I may get it, I may not get it, I'll get it eventually, but you're taking all the pressure off yourself and off the buyer. And that's the gumball analogy. And I love that analogy. How do we then make sure that we're bringing the right mindset to that game? Is that when the green gumball, which is the one you want, comes out, we don't fumble it and let it drop in the dirt. Then it's no good. We can't take it. How do you make sure we do that?
So I think it's just really managing the ebb and flow, as I mentioned earlier, of that conversation. So I think it's being transparent in what you're trying to accomplish. And so when that person's physically on the phone with you, it's saying, hey, listen, this may be of value, this may not be of value. Let's take some time and figure it out together. And, you're going to have some people that just say no game, right? You're going to get the hang-ups occasionally. And listen, I can't control what mood somebody shows up to a prospecting call in. I can't control what just happened to them 30 seconds prior to me reaching out to them. I can only control how I feel about the interaction and how I manage that interaction. And so if I'm kind of just transparent with, listen, it's a prospecting call. It's probably not going to be the worst thing that happens to you today. But if you're open, let's take a few moments. I'll share the reason I'm reaching out. If we find value in a separate conversation, we'll figure that out at the end. If there's no value, no harm, no foul. And so I think just sort of setting that stage kind of takes the pressure off of the conversation. The person on the other side of the phone says, I can endure this, right, in their own mind. This won't be that bad. And then really from there, it's kind of understanding, the observations and being able to articulate the observations you're making kind of real time, right? And by observations, I mean, what's going on in people's businesses that they might have some gaps in, right? And making those observations and sharing those observations. And so, today we've got, organizations that, probably started the year with high hopes, with strong pipelines, with great backlog, and they've seen an attrition of that hope, that backlog, and that pipeline. In other cases, we found that there were companies that came into this struggling and now continue to struggle, and they sort of buried their heads in the sand and they're looking around trying to figure out how do they get out of this better. There were other companies that said, we fought our way through this. We certainly recognized that there were some gaps in our sales process. We want to find a way to fix them. Well, those are the real-time observations today. Those observations may be different in 90 days or in 180 days. But I think we have to be aware of what observations are we making about the community that we sell into? What are the challenges that they may be dealing with real time? And simply share those stories and say, here's what we see. Are you experiencing something like this? Well, listen, if the answer is no, then I say, good for you. That's fantastic. If the answer is yes, we continue to engage.
That's a really interesting point, because the last time I saw you make cold calls, your observations were different. It was probably 18 months ago, and at obviously a very different world. And what I'm hearing now, those observations are very pertinent to, it's like you're walking in the shoes of the person you're calling. How does the world look like to them right now? Because that's what's going to resonate, fair?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's taking the time to reflect upon, it's wonderful to know your features and your benefits and your advantages and have your talk tracks down and know your competitive advantage. I mean, it's great to have all that, but I think it's more important that we are taking the time to just sort of, as you said, walk in somebody else's shoes and make those observations, make them real. And again, not focus on the pitch, but focus on the person.
I'm curious, how many of those different, categories of 30-second commercials do you have to have that can roll off your tongue like yours just did? The one I heard might be a business owner, and you're talking to business owners. How would you go about, if you're sitting down right now with a rep looking at their territory, how would you recommend they go about getting into those shoes and being able to get it where they've got their observations nice and tight? What would that process be?
Sure. Well, I think really step one is if I'm sitting down with that rep, I want them to be able to kind of understand what are the problems that their business solves for others, right? And so, and not those unicorn problems, right? Those kind of one-off problems that, we really did a great job, but they're not terribly common. So I think you want to look at sort of your swim lane and say, what are the common problems that people are having today? And then simply turn those into stories, right? And it's a story from a kind of a third party perspective where I'm making this observation. I'm going to share that story with you. And it doesn't have to be elaborate. I want to keep it simple. I want to start where, I want that prospect to perhaps envision themselves in that story where I say, I've got, we're talking to business owners who came into the year with strong pipelines and healthy backlogs and a lot of high hopes for 2020. Right. Well, that's, I'm hoping that that's going to resonate with a lot of people where that owner in our audience says, that was us. Right. And then I want to transfer that story to that problem statement. Right. But, over the last few months, there's been an attrition of that pipeline and that backlog has disappeared. And certainly the hope is difficult to maintain. Right. And so that's the observed problem. And as a result, companies don't know where to go and they're trying to find ways to come out of this stronger. Right. That's the impact of that observation. And so I think if I just, the format that we use is stroke, problem statement, impact statement. So keep it nice and simple, keep it nice and clean, use your words, right? You don't have to, be overly articulate. You don't have to, have all the fancy language, buzzword and grammar. Be yourself and make those true observations. And, let the data determine whether or not I want to have different 30-second commercials. My advice, you probably want just a bank of 6 or 7 prepared so that you can pivot in each of those conversations. Don't try to get creative on every call. And, with some consistent practice and repetition, you can really take ownership of, truly making it sound like just two people having a friendly discussion or dialogue.
So what's the worst thing that ever happened to you when you took that approach on a prospecting call?
Boy, worst thing that ever happened to me. I don't even know that I can recollect the worst thing that has ever happened outside of just somebody hanging up the phone and not engaging in a conversation. And I don't know if that's kind of where you're going, but I got to tell you, I don't believe anybody's ever threatened me personally. I don't believe anybody's ever threatened my family. I'm pretty sure I've never been stalked by somebody that I cold called who said no. I've never hurt myself making a cold call, physically or mentally, so I'm not so sure that anything other than I've simply disqualified you as an opportunity today, not forever, and I wish you the best.
So help me understand this then. I've spoken to many sales managers, directors certainly over the last couple of years, that there's a question I would always ask them, which is when you put your ear out your office door onto the sales floor, what do you hear? Do you hear the sound of people speaking to people, or do you hear the sound of keys clicking? And every time they hear it's silence, it's keys clicking. Why do you think people are so reluctant to pick up the phone? Maybe the keyboard is more effective.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's certainly lots of different ways that we can prospect. It shouldn't just be cold calls or networking events or emails or LinkedIn or texting or, I think it's a healthy combination of all of those things is valuable. I think with the advent of certain technologies, it has afforded us salespeople the chance to hide from that we despise the most. We at times can convince ourselves that I'm being more efficient. I'm being more productive. I'm casting a wider net, doing other things. If I really sat down and were honest with myself, I would recognize that the amount of time it would take me to write a prospecting email, I could probably make 7 prospecting calls in that time, because, I would write the email, then I would want to edit it, then I would want to edit it again, and then I want to have somebody else edit it, and then I would want to edit their edits. Then before I know it, it's taking me 30 minutes to perhaps pop one email that maybe goes out to a whole bunch of folks, but I don't know how productive of time that is. It's what I call the concept of creative avoidance. If I'm more than happy to let somebody walk into my office and say, "Can you help me?" Yes, because I was about to prospect. I'll go do that, right? Or take a call from a client who might need my assistance. Well, I'm happy to do that rather than prospect. I know growing up, I can probably look back and say it's my mother's fault. It's all of our mother's fault for why we are looking for ways to get out of prospecting, because I think our mothers who tried to raise us as safe and polite children said things like, don't talk to strangers, only speak unless spoken to. Good children are, seen but not heard. Stop asking so many questions. Well, we heard that growing up, and whether you like it or not, it's in the back of your head somewhere. And it becomes this advanced reason for why I might get that knot in the pit of my stomach before making that first call.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things. You've heard of the term fear of rejection. I've never been quite comfortable with that term, because I think it goes deeper than that. I think there is a sense that if we run into an obstacle, as in we're pushed away, we're sidelined, we're batted away, it almost goes core to our identity as humans. It's like we take that knock on our eyesight where we're kind of going, they dismissed me. And they didn't just tell you to go away, they dismissed me. I think it goes core. Because if you think about it, if you sent an email and they said, call me, most people will have zero difficulty picking up the phone and calling them. But it's the calling, not knowing whether there's going to be acceptance on the other end. It makes people feel really, really uncomfortable. And I was wondering if you had any tips for people to overcome that, or maybe to be able to put it aside even for momentarily while they got past it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's recognizing that it's not an attack on you, right? It's not diminishing what you're providing to a marketplace. When somebody says, I don't want to engage, or, I don't want to, continue in the prospecting conversation, it's not your fault. It's not their fault. It's not your company's fault. It is just simply the situation in the moment, and it is what it is, and it's okay. And I think it is important that we do separate the way we perform from the way we feel about ourselves. I have a good friend who's got a teenage son who, and it's funny, when we were growing up, my parents would say, you have to go call the young lady for the date. When they were growing up, their parents would say, you have to show up on the young lady's front door and knock to ask for that first date. And my friend's son sent a text to a young lady and said, would you like to go to the movies? And she came immediately back with, not really, to which he even creatively said, my fault, wrong Kathy, right? So he's texting and I just thought, what a phenomenal way to protect your identity is I simply say, no, I hit the wrong contact in my phone. Yeah. But I think we just have to look at that situation as a moment in time. It has nothing to do with you as a human being. It doesn't make you less of a person. It doesn't make you less of a salesperson. It doesn't do anything but simply confirm that person that you spoke with is not a prospect for now.
If only we could have a prospecting app where you could swipe right on it.
That would be fantastic.
I think we'd make a lot of money on that one. Yeah. Tell me, Sean, I have noticed in the past year, certainly in the past 9 months, that you have a much stronger presence on social media. I think certainly by perception, a few years ago, if Sean were prospecting, you're in a corner somewhere with a phone around, walking up and down, making your calls. But I've seen there's more to your mix these days. What's working for you? What are you doing more of? What are you doing less of?
Sure. I mean, I think it's really more of everything. I mean, the advice we've given to clients is, in these times, if you feel like your business may be off as a result of what we've all experienced, determine how much it's going to be off, and by that percentage, do that much more prospecting activity. So if you think your business is going to be off 30%, then do 30% more prospecting activities and behaviors. Leveraging centers of influence has really been productive, and really getting to know these centers of influence and really becoming mutually trusted resources for one another. To the point where, I'm asking centers of influence to engage with my clients. And so we bring guest speakers in. And
give us some other examples of centers of influence for people watching.
Sure. So, the centers of influence would be really in any industry, somebody that sells in parallel with you, but not in competition with you. So, a business advisor, or, a banking office in our world, right? Or, a CPA or an attorney, or, a Vistage chair. People they sell in parallel, and we all deal with the same types of prospects. So to me, those are the best centers of influence. And I think being a center of influence first, starts to get those Olympic rings that start to cross over, right? Where, I want to be a center of influence for a good attorney, and give them a platform to share their message about succession planning or estate plan, things like, and that platform then opens them up to say, I want to give my customers access to your information. So, and that leads to great referrals and introductions. I think other activities are really going back to, folks that did say no to you. Folks that maybe stopped engaging with you. I kind of gave it its own title back in the March timeframe. Make a tap call, right? Tap somebody on the shoulder and let them know you're still here, you're still relevant. You can help them if they want or need the help. But if we're tapping people on the shoulder saying, "Hey, I'm still here," that's been an addition to our cookbook, a more intentional addition to the cookbook, where we want to go and recapture opportunities. Certainly expanding relationships, and so we're making a lot more touch calls and making sure that we're sort of side by side with our customers, helping them along the way. Trying to do things that might positively play it forward. And so, believe it or not, we took this opportunity to actually give training away. And the folks that had invested in us at some point in time in their lives or their careers, and we wanted to make a small investment back to them and give them access to a vibrant training program for a period of time to keep their head right, to keep their tactics sharp. And I think things like that will pay forward, and they already have begun to pay forward. So there's been just doing more activity, being more intentional, and again, just focusing on, if I needed 3 appointments a week, well, maybe now it should be 4. If I needed 7 appointments a week, now it should be 10.
You mentioned, Sean, cookbook, and you also mentioned that when you're advising clients, you say, look, if you're 30% off, you got to make that up. Presumably that's via cookbook. For people who are not familiar with that term, maybe you could just give us a 5-minute overview of what a cookbook looks like, and how it could help close that 30% gap.
Yeah, it's truly your recipe for success. If we just go with the concept of a cookbook. So it's all the different ingredients that I need to put together in a particular sequence and order to come out with a finished product. And so I really have to kind of determine what's the finished product that I'm looking for, right? How much revenue, or how many new clients, or value of contracts. So I kind of have to go to the end and say, all right, so this is what I want this finished product to look like. Now I have to begin to work things backwards. All right. So if I need to, generate or create this finished product, what are the things that need to happen in advance of that? How many conversations do I need to be having a week? How many networking events do I need to be attending, virtually or otherwise, in any given point in time? How many centers of influence should I be engaged with? How many appointments do I need to be booking? So I'm going all the way back to say, here's all of the necessary elements that make up my finished product. And now I have to determine what are the measurements or metrics within those specific elements. Do I need 2 eggs or 1 egg? Do I need 3 cups of sugar or 1 cup of sugar? All right. So in using that analogy, it's looking and saying, well, do I need 5 appointments a week or 6 appointments a week? Do I need 30 conversations a week, or 45 conversations a week? Do I need to generate 7 referrals a month or 12 referrals a month? And then just use that as, there's my lighthouse. Right, so that I can walk into a Monday morning and say, here's what I know I need to accomplish to create this finished product down the road. I know that I need, 5 hours of time booked in my calendar to do, 3 hours of prospecting, 2 hours of recapture calls, 1 hour of referral prospecting, and I've got it scheduled. And within that scheduled time, now I know specifically what I'm trying to accomplish. What are the activities that need to take place? What are the attempts? What are the, the leading indicators? How many, conversations? What are the lagging indicators? How many appointments are coming out of it? I think for people that might be listening, there's two numbers you should know. And if you don't know them, I think get them figured out quickly. Is on a weekly basis, how many appointments do you need to book with new opportunities on a weekly basis to hit your number? So you need to know that metric, and then to get that number of conversations based on your historical ratios. How many first-time meaningful conversations do you need to have on a weekly basis to book that number of appointments? If you know those two numbers and you can stick to those two numbers on a weekly basis, your final product is going to be pretty close to what you've envisioned and created for yourself.
Okay. We have hit upon three elements of the success triangle: attitude, behavior, and technique. And we talked about attitude, the gumball approach, in terms of a philosophy, how you approach prospecting. We also talked a little bit around tactics in terms of those 30-second commercials, how you break them down and how you engage with somebody early on so that it's a pressure-free conversation between two people just mutually exploring to see if there's something there for both of them. And then we've also looked a little bit at behaviors through cookbooks in terms of what's our end goal, what are the activities we need to do to get there, and how do we break that down, how do we measure it, track it, and so on. Let's talk a little bit then about what happens when the wheels come off the wagon, when we run into objections like no time right now, or we don't have any money. You know, don't you realize we're in the middle of a pandemic here? No interest. How do you deal with those?
Sure, and you know, I would love someday to change the lexicon or the perception of the word objection, right? Because there are no objections, right? There are expressions of disinterest, right? They're not objections, and so we kind of have to look at these exchanges as emotionally neutral, right? And simply say it's going to be what it is, and I am not here, nor can I place enough pressure on myself to try to change everybody's mind. I can't be a conversionist with what I'm doing. I think when I hear things like that, it's taking the opportunity to say, you know what, they just shared something with me. I should be thankful for what they shared. And perhaps what I want to do is try to see where that conversation can go. And so I like to view prospecting conversations as just that, conversations where you get the gift of learning. And sometimes when somebody says, you know, we just don't have the money for it, we are in the middle of this, I say, I understand. And we're hearing a lot of that. Can you tell me more about how it's impacting you and what you're doing about it? So I don't want to use this as a chance to try to get into this back and forth arm wrestling match or tennis match. I want to just sort of get on your side of the conversation and learn more. So I think if people can look at this as a opportunity to learn from the people that they're engaged with in prospecting calls, I think you get the chance to take that dialogue a little deeper.
Makes sense. Tell me, if you were playing Desert Island prospecting and you could only have one prospecting tool to take with you and you were gone for 6 months, what would you bring and why?
I would bring my smartphone because it can pretty much do everything I need it to do out of one singular location. It's going to keep all my contacts. It's going to connect me to the internet. It's going to get me on LinkedIn. It's going to dial those contacts with a push of a button. It's going to help me calculate the amount of commissions I'm going to earn every time I book an appointment and move an opportunity forward using that calculator function. That smartphone is going to get a lot done for me no matter where I'm sitting.
Hopefully you'll have a signal.
Hopefully.
Small caveat. Tell me, when I talk to people like yourself, there are clearly two things going on. Huge oversimplification here. One is, what do I need to do today to be successful? And clearly you've got that down. You know what you're doing. But when I look 6 months down the line from now, 12 months down from the line, and I look to what do I need to be working on to be successful in the future? What's that for you?
Yeah, I think there's kind of three things here. One is always reflecting upon your level of commitment, right? And for me, commitment, my definition of commitment is loyalty to a cause. right? And loyalty to the cause. So to stay loyal to a cause, I have to have one. So I think every 6 months, we got to really look at our cause and say, are we truly motivated emotionally to this end result? And if so, what am I willing and not willing to do to stay loyal to that cause? So, I mean, I think it's regularly working on building your level of commitment. I think a second thing would be having deeper conviction behind what you do. And to me, conviction is choosing a place to stand and not moving from that position. And so really looking at your business model and saying, where am I going to maintain the highest level of conviction? You know, and conviction to me isn't necessarily the passion for what you do, right? That comes from that cause that you've developed. Conviction is setting some rules and guidelines for yourself and saying, I'm not moving from this spot, right? And so, you know, it could be as simple as, I'm not going to let somebody, you know, force me down to a non-decision maker in my prospecting activities. I'm not moving from that position, right? So I think it's regularly building that conviction. And then finally, consistency. Always be practicing, always be pressure testing your conversations, build that group of peers. You know, there's so many people in our network that, you know, when I step back and say something's not working, rather than trying to fix it myself, I go to guys like you, and I go to folks like Amy, and I go to people that I know have it down already, and I say, just give that to me, and then I'll practice it. And so I think we always want to work on being consistent in our execution. And the way we can develop that consistency is by, you know, leaning on peers, learning and sharing best practices, and just getting, you know, those talk tracks down.
Sean, we're coming up against our time buffer here, and I wanted to, it's one of those perennial questions that you hear a lot, but I generally like it, so I'm going to ask it, which is, if you were to go back and give advice to your younger self when you were starting out, what would you say and what would you do differently?
Boy, it's probably a lot of different things. I think starting out, I would have said, try not to do it all on your own, right? Hunt in a pack, you know, be open to assistance, be vulnerable fast, be willing to share and, you know, help as many people as you can. And, you know, focus on what truly is important to you, and understand, you know, I would have said, Sean, know how you're truly motivated. Don't be motivated by things that you think would be culturally acceptable. Really work at figuring out how you will stay loyal to your cause and truly stay emotionally tied to your goals, you know, rather than saying, oh, I want to accomplish this because it seems like a great idea, or I want to accomplish that because I think that person might appreciate it. But really understand your true motivational filter. And I think another thing that took me a while in Sandler to get better at, I'm not great at it, but using our journal, right? And using, you know, taking the opportunity to write down every day what you need to be working on, what you need to get better at, and keeping, I wish I would have said, take that 99-cent notebook and start writing your thoughts down every day, way back then in those first, you know, days in sales.
I think you've answered the question I was going to ask you, is how do you stay focused on that which you attach to? You're going to say the journal, right? A question though I am really curious about is, over the years, how much does your true north change?
Oh, it's changed dramatically. You know, when I first got into Sandler, I had no children. Now I have 3, right? When, you know, 14 years ago, I had a newborn. Well, now I have 2 teenagers in my house, right? So that north is going to change. You know, some portion of that north is going to stay steady, right? There is an ultimate end that we're trying to get to, but there's going to be some detours along the way, and some of them are going to be planned detours, and some of them will not be. And, you know, I think we just experienced an unplanned detour, but it is a detour nonetheless. It is not the end to the journey. It is not the end to the north. It's simply taken us off course. But if that north is truly important to us, we're going to figure out how to get back in that direction sooner rather than later.
If you could catapult yourself 6 months into the future, but talk to us in 2020, what would you say to the rest of the world, the sales world?
Yeah, I would simply say that if you're willing to pivot and adjust and bring it, in every interaction, you're going to succeed. And if you're going to battle, if you're going to be in attack mode, you're going to succeed. If you bury your head in the sand, you're going to fail. If you're looking for help, find it sooner rather than later.
That seems like a good place to leave it, Sean. Sean Coyle, you've been an absolute dream to have as my guest today. Thank you very much.
Paul, I appreciate you inviting me here, and this was a great conversation as always with you, so thanks.
All right, I'm just going to stop the recording there. Oh, shit.